Hello, my name is Julian Carrington, and I'm a programmer at Planet in Focus, and I'm very pleased to share this Q&A with Afterwork Director Erik Gandini, who is joining remotely from Sweden. Erik, thank you for making time to discuss the film with me.
Thank you.
Normally with Q&As, I begin by asking our filmmakers about their impetus to look at a topic. I know that in your case, 20 years ago, you released a film called Surplus,
Mm,
which looked at capitalism and consumption and also labor.
mm.
So, in a sense, Surplus was a precursor for After Work. I'm wondering what prompted you to revisit some of these concepts.
I started doing character-driven films, and about 20 years ago, Surplus was one of the first film I did, which is more, uh, I'd say, idea-driven, in the sense that I'm interested in how ideas, the most obvious ideas, like work or consumption, things we just sort of we live with them, and it can be hard to question them. In the case of work, it's really uh, as normal as the air we breathe, and I wanted to look at work not only as a necessity, which is obviously, especially in documentaries, is a topic which is very important. It's always on the agenda, and often looked at in terms of exploitation and all the things we know about related to work. But I wanted to look at work as an idea that seems to have a grip on us. And uh, when I started this project, the whole notion of artificial intelligence, automation, and ChatGPT was kind of distant. I mean, I started just before the pandemic.
Mm.
Then there was the pandemic, but uh, I I mean, now there's a lot of talking about what's going to happen to us when technology replaces us, and it's somehow maybe a story that we recognize. For me, the biggest question was more like this opportunity that technology has given us, that technology seems to give us. This opportunity has been there for a long time. So the big question for me is like, why haven't we taken that opportunity of
Mm.
working less? I mean, in the 70s, we were half as productive as today. It means that it took 100 people to do what it only takes 50 people today.
Mm.
That hasn't reflected in a diminishing or of the working hours. There's very little discussion about like shortening the working week. Then, of course, it varies from country to country, but that kind of that riddle because there is a mystery. Why, what is it in this idea that is so dominant that we have such a hard time freeing ourselves from it? That was the
Mm.
starting.
You mentioned that work ethic or the relationship to work can be influenced culturally and varies from country to country. Obviously, the film does bring us to a number of different cultural contexts. I'm wondering how you settled on each of the case studies that you've chosen to present.
Mm. Well, the first part of the film is basically the present in its dysfunctional sides, and I was fascinated by Americans' aversion to holidays.
Mm.
They call it no vacation nation, and all these. I mean, I was interested in general uh, in societies where people work when you don't need to work, and in that sense, the US was one of the starting point. Korea at least recognizes the problem.
Mm.
It's probably the only country in the world where the Minister of Labor is on a mission to make people work less. So they are trying to address the problem because it has become a huge problem in a way that it's unavoidable, not only health wise, but I think what struck me a lot was that the biggest price is on relationship, like especially generation of children who grew up with that, with never meeting the fathers especially. So they
Mm.
have these campaigns of like this little advertising, for example, in the film when you see uh, kind of suggestions in the sense of images of what people could do instead of going to work. You know, like go home and paint, do painting, or spend time with your family, or work out. I mean, somehow that little advertising was the essence of a whole, I think, situation for us as humanity. We have sort of lost the ability of imagining what could be instead of the office, instead of work, you know. And
Mm.
of course, then when that doesn't work, they use these even stronger measures as, yeah, turning off the computers essentially and so on. So that's the first part of the film. Then for me, there is a look into more like, you could say, futuristic type of case studies. I mean, Kuwait, in the sense, is a very scary outcome of a society where you have all the money from the oil, you
Mm.
have the slaves, you have all the opportunities of really readjusting life. They have really maximized the amount of free time for themselves, obviously, the citizens of Kuwait. But that is not followed with a sort of a trust in human beings, so that, okay, we trust you as a human being, here's the money, do what you want. No, instead people are asked to continue working, to
Mm.
pretending to work. And that is somehow a similar sort of lack of collective imagination of how life could be, of how we could redefine work in our life. And
Mm.
then, to make a long story short, obviously I was very fascinated in meeting super rich people who have never worked. And I managed to do that in my home country, Italy, where I also was fascinated by this phenomenon of the needs, which is in Europe, Italy has a sort of a record of. And of course, in Italy, the needs are looked as a huge reason for worry, because they, you know, traditionally people would say that, oh, this will lead the country to some sort of economical collapse. And in my case, I can, on the contrary, look at this as some sort of healthy aversion to work. Uh, Although there's a lot of hedonism which you could connect to 30 years of Berlusconism, which is another story I made a
Mm.
film about also. But
Mm.
on at the same time, this claiming the right of not working, I think in a film you can also reflect upon if this maybe is an opening to something different, which is necessary. I mean,
Mm.
no characters, no story in the film comes with a solution. That's really a choice. I mean, I am interested in very conflictual case studies and characters who are carried this side of the idea work, which I recognize myself in all of the characters somehow.
Mm.
But the idea was also not to come with with heroes or solutions and tell people what to do, because that's more what the Gallup culture, corporate culture of like
Mm.
telling people through management and so on how to live their life. And that's really not, that's what we really, I think, have to get over and really start thinking for ourselves.
Mm. Were there any noteworthy case studies that you had considered while the project was in development that perhaps you didn't incorporate into the final film?
Well, not really. I mean, I had, I did some shooting with the pensioners, retired people in Sweden,
Mm.
because of course they have an experience of work-free existence, uh, which was interesting. In the end, we just, I mean, it became a bit too much maybe, but I, you know, always hope that these stories somehow just spark a conversation within you. I mean, that you perhaps, you know, we usually say that you should make that half of the film is made by the audience in their own hands,
Mm.
and I hope the same here. And just to go back a little bit to this, I know that this question in the end is kind of annoying, because, you know, sometimes people say, but tell me, what's, you know, what's the meaning, what's the point, what, how should we redefine our life? And I really consider this question of, okay, what would I do if I didn't have to work? It's both a very personal, individual question, but it's also a question for us collectively as humanity today to really embrace.
Mm. You talk about the audience bringing sort of half of the experience, and I feel like this is a topic because it's so timely, where there's been development even since you wrapped on the film. So, um, from my vantage point, I feel like there's been a shift in the conversation around automation, even in the last year or so, where we're now seeing advancements in technologies that threaten to replace knowledge workers and cultural workers, not just sort of manual laborers, which I think was often how automation was talked about in even the very recent past. Have you observed a shift in thinking around work and automation now that intellectual and creative people appear to be at some risk of redundancy?
Yeah, I mean, it was a big surprise for everybody that, especially when ChatGPT
Mm,
came, we didn't think that was the sort of the creative part of work, writing, of creating pictures, music, that these were the kind of professions that could be at risk. Uh, and that's one of the reasons why maybe also now the topic is much more on the agenda, because it's also the public debate is driven by reporters who write or people who are have intellectual jobs, and suddenly we all feel threatened by that. it, to me, there is maybe a contradiction. I mean, why would we let jobs that we like to do, like creative jobs, why would we let someone else do them? I mean, obviously there is a threat because and that's more has more to do with capitalism, with the fact that we are at risk in the moment we don't have anything to offer on the market that machines can do better. And
mm,
I mean, of course, the whole going back a little bit, maybe not really answering your question, but this idea that we have to work so much that we becomes better people if we have a strong work ethic. In Italian we say makes work makes man noble, and it's something that it's a bit of a deceiving idea because it's been benefiting a lot to some people, but not us. I mean,
mm,
we also, and I'm talking also about in the documentary genre, we always have been celebrating hardworking people because we are more genuine, more authentic, with the sweat of our forehead. We are better than them. And when I was meeting like Rory's, this very rich woman, I would start thinking that maybe it's not work that makes man noble, but it's freedom, freedom to choose.
mm,
We have not been trained as human beings to embrace our freedom, to really look into ourselves and think, what do we want? What do you want to do? Freely also have the trust of being able to decide upon our time. This has not been the case, but it's really time for us to claim that right. And I don't think Chat GPT will turn us into some sort of passive amoebas. I think we are, as human beings, we are creative, dynamic, creatures who want to do good, who want to do good for society also. And all this trust is not there. And maybe Kuwait is a very strong example of this lack of trust,
mm,
that you don't believe in humans in a sense, and you
mm,
enslave them also.
mm. Um, Perhaps by way of closing, because Planet in Focus is primarily an environmental film festival, I'm wondering if your research for the film might have given you any insights into the environmental or climate impacts of the move towards automation. So
I mean,
again, from my own thinking, I could imagine that people might rediscover relationships to, say, local food production, or, you know, in the fossil fuel world, we often have employment as an issue that can be resistant to change, right? We can't cease this because so many people are employed doing this work. Are there any environmental implications that our viewers should perhaps turn their attention to you in your research?
it's really good that you asked that question, considering the topic of the festival. When I interviewed Elizabeth Anderson, she it's also in the film. She talks about conspicuous consumption as something that has been, if the work ethic was driven a lot by the religion, this through decades turned into, you could say, consumer religion. I mean, this obsession for buying things, which obviously is very connected to environmental unsustainability.
Mm.
And I remember reading also when I was doing the research that people who work less buy less, consume less,
Mm.
and it's also really, it's for me it connects also to this trust in human beings. I mean, when you see this Gallup survey and you realize that 85% of the world's employees don't have an engagement in what they're doing. Of course, it's eerie on an emotional, existential level. It's a very shocking thing to imagine 850 million people who go to these jobs without having an engagement. Of course, it makes you think, what would these people do if they did something they want to do, they like to do. And I can't prove it, but I'm pretty sure that people would also engage in uh, in things like the environment, in things that are, that makes you feel good, taking care of other people, taking
Mm.
care of the environment. It's a fact that this kind of activities are beneficial in many ways. And I think this, again, instead of asking people to act, to pretend working, what would happen if we gave them the freedom to choose by themselves? I am pretty confident that many of these things would be on top of the agenda for many people.
Mm. Well, we don't always get hopeful notes to end on with our subject matter, so I'll leap on that and use that as the chance to draw our conversation to a close. Erik, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for inviting after work.
Ah, it's our pleasure. It's such a wonderful and beautifully made film. I'm sorry we didn't get the chance to talk about the craft of it because it really is impeccably made. So thank you for making it, and to those watching, thanks for attending Planet in Focus, and enjoy the rest of your festival.
Okay. Bye bye. Bye from Stockholm. Bye.